What if the woman everyone believed to be a hero was really the mastermind of a dangerous game? When Mai Huong fakes an injury to win Toan's guilt and devotion, Diem quietly recovers in Vong's home, finding unexpected warmth that begins to change her heart. But every passing day draws Toan deeper into Mai Huong's trap and pulls Diem further away. The truth, when it comes, could shatter everything. Subscribe now and follow this gripping story of love, betrayal, and impossible choices, because every secret has a price, and not everyone will survive the truth. The moment the screech of tires echoed down the street, chaos erupted. People turned to see a blur of motion. Mai Huong sprawled on the ground, her white blouse stained with dust, her hair spilling wildly across her face. The crowd gasped and rushed forward, and in the middle of it all, Toan stood frozen, his chest heaving. He had been crossing the road, half distracted by a phone call, when the car had come hurtling toward him. And then, out of nowhere, Mai Huong had appeared, throwing herself into his path, shoving him backward before the vehicle could strike. At least, that was what everyone thought. Within minutes, she was in the hospital, her right arm bound in a sling, a bandage wrapped carefully across her forehead. The bright, sterile scent of antiseptic filled the room, and the dim afternoon light filtering through the blinds gave the scene an almost theatrical quality. Mai Huong lay on the bed, her voice soft, fragile, as she recounted the accident for the 5th time. "I didn't even think. I just ran. I saw the car and thought, if I could push him away, it wouldn't matter what happened to me." Her words were perfectly measured, carrying just the right quiver of selflessness. The nurses nodded sympathetically. Toan's mother, sitting at the edge of the bed, clasped Mai Huong's hands tightly, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You saved my son," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If not for you, I can't even think about what might have happened." Toan shifted uncomfortably in the corner. He hadn't been able to sleep since the incident, replaying it over and over in his mind. The truth was, everything had happened too quickly for him to process. He had no clear memory of Mai Huong running into the road. It was as if the scene had been painted for him afterward by her words, by the people who had witnessed it. And now, surrounded by their gratitude and relief, it felt impossible to question it without seeming ungrateful. As the minutes stretched on, Mai Huong's story grew richer, more vivid. She spoke of the fear in her chest, the sound of the car's horn blaring, the way her knees buckled from the impact. She never once complained about her own pain, only expressed relief that Toan was unharmed. Every pause, every trembling sigh, was perfectly timed to draw out the sympathy of her audience. And it worked. Toan's mother called her a blessing, while an aunt who had rushed over from across town murmured, "She's like family now." The unspoken implication hung in the air: you don't just walk away from someone who risked their life for you. Toan felt the weight of that expectation pressing down on his shoulders. It wasn't just gratitude, it was obligation. The kind that wrapped itself around your conscience like a chain. He found himself sitting closer to Mai Huong, asking after her comfort, adjusting the blanket around her legs. She smiled faintly, her eyes lingering on his face a second too long, as if to remind him of the bond they now supposedly shared. No one knew that beneath the neatly wrapped bandages and carefully constructed words, there was no heroism, only calculation. No one saw how, moments before the car appeared, Mai Huong had been watching Toan from across the street, her mind racing with a plan she'd nurtured for weeks. She had stepped into the road at just the right time, angling the scene so that it would look like she had saved him. The pain she feigned now was only part of the performance. But for Toan, caught in the haze of guilt and gratitude, the thought of questioning her never even crossed his mind. And for Mai Huong, that was exactly how it needed to be. From that day onward, Toan's world shifted. Almost unconsciously, he rearranged his schedule to include daily visits to the hospital. Morning meetings were pushed back, evening plans canceled, everything revolved around the quiet room where Mai Huong lay. She never asked him to come, not directly, but every time he appeared in the doorway, her face would light up with such delicate gratitude that he felt compelled to keep returning. She played her part flawlessly. Some days, she was too tired to eat unless Toan fed her spoon by spoon. Other days, she insisted on trying to walk the hallway but would stumble halfway, forcing him to catch her, her small frame trembling in his arms. "I'm sorry," she would whisper, her breath brushing against his neck. "I guess I'm still not as strong as I thought." The words were always tinged with guilt, as though she were the one inconveniencing him, rather than quietly binding him to her through these moments of tender dependency. Outside the hospital, the story of her heroism had spread through their family circles. Neighbors spoke of her bravery with awe. Relatives who had barely acknowledged her before now dropped by with flowers and fruit, all but declaring her a member of the family. And Toan's mother, deeply moved by the sacrifice she believed had saved her son, began speaking of the future in ways that made Toan's chest tighten. "She's a good girl," his mother would say as they stood in the hospital corridor, her eyes following the nurse wheeling Mai Huong back to her room. "Pretty, kind, selfless. She'd make a wonderful wife. Someone who would always put you first." The implication hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Toan never argued. He told himself it was because he didn't want to upset his mother, but deep down, a heavier truth settled in his gut. He didn't know how to walk away from Mai Huong without feeling like a villain. She had, after all, risked everything for him. That debt seemed impossible to repay with mere words. Meanwhile, Diem's absence weighed on him in quiet, aching moments. He had gone to see her once after the accident, but she had already moved into Vuong's home to recover. "It's closer to the hospital," she had explained over the phone, her voice calm, almost distant. Toan wanted to believe it was purely practical, but the thought of her being cared for by another man gnawed at him. And yet, every time he thought of visiting her, Mai Huong's pale face and wounded smile would flash in his mind, pulling him back into her orbit. Diem, on her part, had stopped asking him to come. She listened patiently whenever he called, but their conversations were shorter now, filled with pauses that neither of them seemed able to bridge. She didn't reproach him for spending so much time with Mai Huong. She didn't need to. The silence between them was reproach enough. One rainy afternoon, Toan arrived at the hospital to find Mai Huong sitting up in bed, a soft blanket draped around her shoulders, her hair brushed neatly over her bandaged forehead. She had been reading a small notebook, but she quickly set it aside as he entered. "You work too hard," she murmured, reaching for his hand. "Don't tire yourself out because of me." Her voice was fragile, but her grip was warm, almost possessive. Toan didn't pull away. Instead, he sat down beside her, the guilt tightening its hold on his chest. And in that quiet room, with the sound of rain tapping gently against the window, Toan didn't notice the faint, triumphant curve of Mai Huong's lips as she rested her head lightly against his shoulder. While Toan's days grew tangled in the quiet captivity of Mai Huong's hospital room, Diem's world was taking a gentler, slower turn. At Vong's house, the air was different, lighter, calmer. His home was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, far from the noise of the city, and the windows opened to a small garden where sunlight spilled over rows of blooming jasmine. The scent lingered in the air, soft and familiar, and for the first time in weeks, Diem could breathe without the weight of worry pressing on her chest. Her first few days there were a haze of rest and recovery. Vong made sure she never lacked for comfort. Her favorite tea appeared on the bedside table every morning, steaming and fragrant. He remembered exactly how she liked her porridge, with just a touch of ginger, and would bring it in a wooden tray, setting it down with quiet precision. He wasn't overly talkative, but there was something grounding in the way he moved, as if every gesture carried an unspoken reassurance, "You're safe here." Sometimes, when Diem insisted on helping around the house, he would gently steer her back to the sofa. "You're still recovering," he would say with a half-smile, handing her a blanket. She would roll her eyes but obey, secretly warmed by his protectiveness. It was a different kind of care than she had ever received from Toan, less urgent, less fraught with guilt or obligation. Vong's kindness didn't demand anything in return. Evenings were the moments she cherished most. They would sit together in the small kitchen, the warm glow of the overhead light pooling around them while rain pattered softly against the roof. Vong would chop vegetables with steady hands while she told him about her day, her voice soft, sometimes breaking into laughter when he offered dry, unexpected comments. It was in those moments, watching the quiet curve of his smile, hearing the low rumble of his voice, that she felt something shift inside her, a gentle pull she tried to ignore. Still, at night, when she lay awake listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of rain outside, Toan's face would come to her. She wondered what he was doing, whether he thought of her at all. But those thoughts no longer kept her heart racing the way they once had. The image of him, sitting beside Mai Huong's bed, his expression heavy with guilt, came unbidden, and with it, a dull ache of acceptance. One Sunday afternoon, she stepped into the kitchen to find Vong bent over the stove, a soft tune humming from his lips. He was wearing an apron far too small for him, and she couldn't help but laugh. He turned, raising an eyebrow. What's funny? You, she said, still smiling. I never imagined you cooking. I never imagined you here, he replied, and for a brief moment, his gaze held hers, steady, unreadable. Something in her chest tightened, and she looked away, busying herself with setting the table. As the days passed, Diem began to realize that the warmth she felt around Vaughn wasn't just gratitude. It was the way he listened without interrupting, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his presence filled the spaces that had once felt empty. Meanwhile, miles away, Toan was sinking deeper into Mai Huong's carefully woven web. Every hour he spent by her side was another strand of obligation binding him in place, and every day that passed was another step that carried Diem further away from him and closer to the quiet, steady warmth waiting in Vong's home.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các khán giả của kênh Lý Tu Diem review. Tập phim ngày hôm nay các bạn có thấy hay không? Nếu các bạn thấy tập phim ngày hôm nay hay